Hello, I'm Yousef Munayyer, head of the Palestine-Israel program and senior fellow here at Arab Center, Washington, D.C., and your podcast host.
Hi, I'm Yara, and I'm a non-resident fellow at the Arab Center, D.C.
Hello, I'm Rami Khouri. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Arab Center, Washington, and a distinguished fellow at the American University of Beirut Hassan Faris Institute.
I'm Hanna Alshaikh. I'm the Palestine Project Coordinator at Arab Center, Washington.
Welcome to another Hiwar episode of this podcast. Hiwar is the Arabic word for dialogue or discussion. And in each of these episodes, I, along with my Arab Center colleagues, discuss some of the big issues of the day. Last time we discussed how the Israeli military had announced an operation going into Gaza City again, aimed at ethnically cleansing it. And now that operation has gotten underway. We've got other developments in the region to talk about as well. And on the international front at the UNGA, which will take place this month, Palestine will also likely be a central story. But I want to start out talking about Gaza, in particular talking about a really egregious incident, massacre really, that took place in Khan Yunis at Nasser Hospital, which was caught on video, of course, and led to a ton of reaction, at least for a short period of time. Yara, can you recap for us what took place during that massacre, what played out, and what sort of has been the fallout since?
Sure, Yousef. So, to set the stage here, and I don't think any listener of this podcast, this is not news to them, but essentially every health facility in Gaza, hospital, primary care facility, even small medical points, has been severely damaged or destroyed at this point. Many have been besieged. They've had their staff kidnapped and tortured. We've seen videos of Israeli soldiers smashing whatever's left of the precious hospital equipment left inside. So this assault on healthcare in Gaza has been going on not just for the past 2 years, but we've seen this type of behavior in every previous assault on Gaza. This one, I think, just happened to be caught on video in such a way that the initial Israeli denial was just not even, acceptable by its ally standards. So last week's incident was at Nasser Hospital, which, as you said, is in Khan Yunis in the southern part of Gaza. It's just the most recent incident in this kind of escalating pattern of attacks. Obviously, with more impunity, we get more and more of these types of incidents. And to put it in more context, Nasser is one of, if not the last, functional hospital in all of southern Gaza. So these kinds of attacks are particularly damaging to the population. So the initial story, as it was reported, was already horrific enough. So Israel bombs this external staircase at Nasser Hospital where a Reuters cameraman, Hussam al-Masri, was filming. And this is well known as an area where journalists will set up live shots in Khan Yunis, and also a place where they could reliably stand outside to get cell phone reception to upload video. So this is, to start with, a well-known location for journalists to do this. Video showed Israel striking that area. And then as first responders came and other journalists to, report on the event, these first responders, many dressed in their obviously, their yellow and vests, and they looked clearly like first responders. This was about 9 minutes later, there was another strike that killed these responding paramedics and journalists. So all told, at least 20 Palestinians were killed. I've since seen reports that it's maybe 22. And this includes 5 journalists. They were working for Al Jazeera, Reuters, Middle East Eye. So this is to add to the about 250 other journalists that have been killed in Gaza. And to add to that, 1,500 healthcare workers that have been killed while Gaza is experiencing famine, daily mass casualty events. So the incident was captured on video. It's widely available on the internet for any listeners who have not yet seen what it looked like when these paramedics were going up these stairs trying to save the lives of their colleagues and getting bombed. At the time, Israeli Prime Minister, and this is not something we typically see from him, Benjamin Netanyahu called the strike a, quote, tragic mishap and said that the military was investigating. This is something we have heard many times before. And the military confirmed that they were targeting what they say they suspected was a, quote, Hamas camera that was surveilling the Israeli military position. So there's no evidence for this. There's no evidence of any action of that sort whatsoever, as there has not been in many, many, many times that Israel has used this claim. The military has engaged in these kind of what are called double tap bombings before, which is you bomb a facility, you wait for first responders to get there, and you bomb it again. So what was actually, I saw reporting several days later by CNN that expert analysis showed an actual third strike. So the second and third strikes were within seconds of each other, but it was actually two distinct strikes from two different positions. And then when asked about this third strike, the IDF had no further comment aside from what they'd already said. And then a BBC investigation a few days later found that there was another blast at a different staircase, but that happened at the same time as the first strike, which got much more attention because there was more people there. So all told, 4 strikes on a hospital facility within about a 10-minute period. And the military justification, they didn't deny that they did this. Their justification was that they were attacking a Hamas camera. So, an Israeli official who was asked about this from CNN did say that the IDF forces did receive authorization to strike the camera with a drone, and instead Israeli forces fired tank shells, the first at the camera and the second at the rescue forces. This was condemned broadly. The Committee to Protect Journalists, the UN Secretary General, a host of countries, of course not the United States, but Canada, the UK, Germany, condemned this, and Israel says that they are investigating. Now, this, again, just a few months ago, Yousef, we were talking about the killing, the murder, the massacre of the 15 paramedics, right? And Israel's initial response to that was, of course, terrorist behavior. Once video evidence came out, it completely dispelled not just their initial narrative, but the narrative they followed that up with, and multiple other stories they tried to tell after the fact about who the people were, what they were doing, and why Israel did what they did. This just happens to be another well-documented event of that nature. I personally, and I don't believe anyone should, expect any consequence from the so-called Israeli investigation. At this point, I have heard we are going to investigate hundreds upon hundreds of times. We never almost hear follow-up, or at the most, they will pinpoint some individual who they will strip rank or shift position or something like that. So this is, really, I think, a moment where we are entering, almost year 2 of the genocide. We have seen about almost every indignity on the Palestinian people. This just to be so blatant during the day when they knew journalists were around filming it. I think this just shows an escalation and a kind of understanding by the Israelis that no one is really going to stop them from even just directly targeting hospitals at this point. And we're not even hearing Hamas command and control center rhetoric anymore. Now it's literally Hamas camera. And that's in their mind, justification for the killing of at least 20 people, which multiple human rights scholars, international law scholars, of course, say completely violates every principle of proportionality, protection of civilians, etc. So I think probably more will come out about this in terms of what happened and who was killed, but I don't expect much resolution from the so-called Israeli investigation, and I don't think anyone will push them on it either.
Yeah, and we should say too, really, since the last time we spoke, we also saw the killing, the murder of Al Jazeera journalist Anas Sharif, along with several of his colleagues that were all targeted in a tent in Gaza. Several of them
also outside a hospital. They were in a media tent outside a hospital.
Exactly, and I'm so glad you mentioned the fact that, even if we take them at their word that they thought that there was a camera that Hamas was using for some sort of surveillance purpose or whatever attached to this building, the idea that you would launch a missile at a hospital once, let alone multiple times, knowingly endangering the lives of patients, civilians, first responders, journalists, all of the above, to deal with a camera itself is outrageous. But it doesn't seem to matter that their excuse is outrageous. And the other thing that I think is worth mentioning here is, like, we've seen a pretty clear pattern of behavior with so many of these instances. In this case, it's caught on camera, right? So many of these instances aren't caught on camera, at least not live. Oftentimes the cameras arrive after the fact, and cover the sort of gruesome reality that's left behind by Israel's bombs. But this is actually, like, we saw on camera how a bomb lands on these first responders that are trying to rescue people who've been injured the first time around. So there's no denying what happened here. There's no saying this is Hamas propaganda. This was captured live, right? And in these kinds of instances, we've often seen Israeli responses that are a little bit different. When they're not caught on camera, sometimes it's just like immediately dismissed. Well, it's not true, whatever. We targeted a terrorist, et cetera, et cetera. But in these situations, it's a mishap. There will be an investigation. It kind of softens the outrage for a little bit. And a few days later, we get the longer investigative pieces by independent journalists. We realize that the story is actually nothing like what they were telling. There's no way that this could have been an accident. And the world moves on to the next massacre. And one of the things that we sort of learned in the last several weeks is that the Israeli military has something that they refer to as sort of a legitimacy unit, which is responsible specifically for coming up with explanations for why strikes that they carry out should be considered legitimate. Find me some kind of connection between this person that we hit and something that we can say is bad, so we can claim this is a legitimate strike. And it reminds me of in 2021, we all remember the sort of unity uprising in Palestine that culminated in, of course, again, Israeli bombardment of Gaza at the time. And what really kind of brought that moment to an end was Israel's bombing of a building that housed Al Jazeera and the Associated Press live on camera. It was broadcast before the entire world live. I remember very well, it was on a Saturday morning, and there was no denying what just took place. And at that moment, there was enough outrage to say, okay, what are you doing here? Stop this. And we've had so many moments like that over the last 2 years, and yet no one has been able to tell them to stop this. And I also felt, you're right, the brazen nature of this, hitting a hospital multiple times, broad daylight, on camera, they couldn't care less what anyone else around the world thinks. And they're testing the limits of what they can get away with precisely as they are about to go into Gaza City, a city that's already been decimated, but to go in and essentially level what remains of the city, and no one is stopping them. Hanna, this is where we are right now on the ground in Gaza City. What is the latest about what we know is happening there, and how do we see this moving forward?
Well, as we all know, Netanyahu has insisted on carrying out his plans for this mass scale assault on Gaza City, which was announced at the beginning of last month, to be aimed at the eventual occupation of the city. And this plan has been, quite controversial within Israel, but never controversial enough. And as we discussed in our last episode, the Israeli military chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, criticized Netanyahu's plan when it was initially announced, stating like a preference to attack Gaza City from the outside due to personnel issues, logistical constraints, and concerns for the hostages. And for a brief period back then, it looked like Israel would see its third military chief of staff over the course of this 2-year genocide, with calls to replace Zamir, just like Herzi Halevi before him. But predictably, the military establishment, rather than taking pause, did fall in line with Netanyahu's demands. However, these sort of outstanding issues that Zamir has outlined were never resolved regarding personnel and supplies and logistics. Now, it's not surprising that they're pushing forward with this attack. It's actually heading into phase 2 of this plan called Gideon's Chariots. And it's an operation that costs almost $8 billion US. And like I mentioned, these personnel issues haven't been resolved. And I'm going to get to, what the impact of this is ultimately. And it doesn't look good, but the personnel issues have not been resolved. 60,000 reservists have been called up so far. But today, Haaretz actually reported that the Israeli military has refused to disclose the number of reservists who actually reported for duty and responded to this call. But if you look around, there are some reports here and there that seem to point to a general figure of about 35,000 reservists currently being mobilized, which might get us closer to a figure. And this all seems to be roughly in line with estimates that 50% of reservists are not reporting for duty or not answering the call. But at any rate, it's still useful to note the cost of this war, and that they are, in fact, taking a toll on the Israeli economy. The daily expenditure for this reservist mobilization is about $110 million a day. And again, that's per day. And the cost of mobilizing a reservist is double that of a regular soldier. But reservists make up about 70% of its forces. Meanwhile, Israel is dealing with a shortage of bulldozers and armored parts, with the military complaining that about 30 to 40% of those bulldozers are unfit for use. And they've only received something like half of the night vision equipment and Humvees that they had ordered that they believe are necessary for this operation. This is according to a report from Ynet. And so when the plan is to destroy a city, weaponized bulldozers are very important to destroy homes and the remnants of homes and infrastructure and build or cover up mass graves. And so Israel's ultimate goal of ethnic cleansing, both in the attack on Gaza City, its previous flattening of Rafah, its attack on Khan Yunis, its attack throughout the Gaza Strip, all of this bears repeating, and it's evidence in these large purchases. It's something like 132 bulldozers from the United States, and they've received about half of them so far, and this is a big complaint. And so there have been many setbacks here, but ultimately all of them have been minor for the Israeli military, which has found the necessary means to nonetheless devastate Palestinian life in Gaza in the meantime. So, for example, according to Euromed Monitor, one way that the startup nation has sort of gotten around some of these issues is using sort of armored, remote-controlled robots that are sort of hooked up with explosives to demolish these residential areas. And they've been using that in and around Gaza City during this attack. So neighborhoods like Jabalia al-Balad, Jabalia al-Nazla, Zaytoun, Sabra, and Shuja'iyya, and Tufah have all seen the effects of the use of these weapons. They're being used also at an intensifying rate. About 15% of the attacks per day have been using them. And they usually are used in about 7 operations per day. Each of these robots can carry something like 7 tons of explosives. And it can sort of impact or sort of cause damage within a 100-meter radius or so. And so it's been used on about 300 residential units per day. Both like in Gaza City, but also in the nearby Jabalia camp. And so what does this look like in a large scale? About 2 weeks into this operation, Haaretz has released satellite images that show how major sections of Gaza City have been utterly decimated in this attack. In the last 24 hours, the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood of Gaza City has seen a huge uptick in violence and destruction. Israel has not only destroyed homes, but also been bombing and attacking makeshift tents where displaced families are sheltering. So over 100 Palestinians were killed yesterday, September 2nd, with most of the deaths being in Gaza City. And one Al Jazeera correspondent, Hani Mahmoud, described the destruction of Gaza City as rendering entire neighborhoods into, and I quote, fields of rubble. And he noted that Jabalia and Zaytoun are suffering from systematic home destruction, artillery attacks, and bulldozer activity. So over 1,000 buildings in 2 neighborhoods, the Sabra neighborhood and the Zaytoun neighborhood, have been utterly destroyed. and entire urban blocks have been wiped off the face of the earth. And so this is what Gaza City is dealing with right now. This is what the picture looks like. And where it's headed is more of this and more of the same. And it's clear that this is not just a military campaign. It's not just Israel looking to exert control and exercise some sort of occupation in the way that it exercises occupation in the West Bank, which is just as illegal under international law and just as unacceptable. But this is also a project of erasure. It wants to dismantle Gaza and the idea of Gaza. It's the largest Palestinian city. It's a Mediterranean city, a city with ancient roots and deep significance in both Palestinian and in regional history. And it wants to destroy this city, and it destroys a symbol. It destroys homes, it destroys lives, it destroys communities. But it also is aiming to sever Palestinians from an idea and from a place that anchors them and their presence as a people and their demand for freedom. And so using bulldozers, using airstrikes, and now these remote-controlled robots shows how mechanized tools of war are being used by Israel to turn neighborhoods into rubble, and how this genocide has been made efficient, and how not at one point has any of the supplies been cut off by the United States. And it's turning Gaza into an urban wasteland. It's pouring billions of dollars into this operation. It's straining its own economy, but it will continue to push forward stubbornly regardless. It's all pointing to the true objective of all of Israel's activity in the Gaza Strip, not just in Gaza City, and that is expulsion and demographic reengineering.
And you know, Hanna, at the same time, we're hearing Benjamin Netanyahu say that you know, we're at the last decisive moment of this war. He's repeatedly characterized this part of the military campaign as sort of the last step, the final piece of what they're doing in Gaza. We've also heard from President Trump that he wants to see it end quickly, finish the job quickly, I think is what he has said. He's also noted that Israel is sort of really losing the war for public opinion. And that it needs to wrap things up quickly. And we are hearing through reporting in the Israeli media that the military doesn't think that this is going to be a quick thing at all. And the military thinks that this is probably going to be a campaign that could last up to a year, perhaps more. And so we get these sort of conflicting messages about what's going on here in terms of Israel's intentions on the ground. I think in terms of the goal, there's no doubt. And I agree with you 100%. They want to get as many Palestinians out of that area as possible and make sure that there's nothing for them to come back to. But as far as like Israel's goals that are stated in terms of the goals of the war, it's hard to see how this specific campaign on Gaza City is going to do anything to necessarily eliminate Hamas. Just destroying buildings is not going to ensure that you've eliminated members of a militant group if that is actually your target. And it doesn't really seem to be doing anything to advance their other goal, which is around bringing the hostages back to Israel, those still being held captive in Gaza. But you know, I wonder if the idea here, if there is really a timeline here that is running out for Israel to wrap things up, as we've heard from Trump, if this is really just not something politically that Netanyahu can point to be able to say that, you know, by the end of this operation, we've destroyed Gaza City, the largest city in Palestine, as the sort of feather in his cap of all of his wonderful accomplishments, as he would like to frame them in his pitch to the Israeli public. It's hard to see it as anything else, and I'm wondering what you think.
Well, there's one thing to keep in mind is that we're approaching the 20-year anniversary of I guess what they would call the Gaza disengagement, in which the Sharon government in 2005 dismantled settlements and military outposts in the Gaza Strip. And this was really done to, refocus attention on the West Bank. And so I do think that, for people like Netanyahu, that symbolism is important. And I think creating some sort of show, if they're not going to return the settlements there, causing as much pain and destruction ahead of that anniversary is definitely there. It looks like there will be no end in sight to this, also ahead of the second-year anniversary of October 7th. So I think in that respect, we're going to push forward. We're going to see this pushing forward. And I think in many ways it also is a total there's a total dismissal of the, and I think we'll talk about this later, but the international outcry. So there are calls for recognition of Palestinian statehood that are growing. Certain states are now announcing that they are weighing or plan to implement sanctions against Israel. And all of this is to say that, Israel is going to continue to push forward because the weapons and the military financing from the U.S. has not stopped flowing.
Yeah, and we also saw recently the statement from the International Association of Genocide Scholars who came out and said, listen, guys, like this is a genocide. It's as genocide gets. It fits the legal definition, and we should not even be having a debate about this at this point. But before we head to the international, I want to stick in the region for a moment and ask a little bit about what's happening next door in Lebanon. There's been a continued press by the United States to move towards the disarmament of Hezbollah in Lebanon. This has really led to some significant contention within Lebanon, and there's been really heightened rhetoric from a lot of different directions. And recently we saw the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, I guess that's what he is now, right? Tom Barak, who was in Lebanon along with the deputy special envoy for the Middle East, Morgan Ortigas, representing the United States. And he had some choice words for the Lebanese press during his time there that raised a lot of red flags. Rami, I'm wondering if you could kind of catch us up on what took place there and how this is likely to move forward in the days and weeks to come.
Sure. What took place in the last month or two is really an encapsulation of the last entire century, as is so often the case in these issues, because so much of what's going on today in Palestine and Syria and Lebanon, anywhere in the region, is linked to deep historical roots and drivers. In Lebanon, you have two things going on, I think. You have the Lebanese government trying to assert its authority and sovereignty. It is elected, it's a legitimate government, but the prime minister and the president were not massively unanimous choices. They were approved by a majority, but without massive enthusiasm, though they're both respected people. And the situation in Lebanon is still very bad economically, and reconstruction is not going anywhere because there aren't enough funds, and there isn't enough buy-in from all of the different players, how they're going to share the pie when they do get funds to rebuild things. And the U.S. and Israel took advantage of this to pressure the Lebanese government in the last 4 or 5 months or so, thinking that Hezbollah has been weakened. The new Lebanese government is more determined to assert its sovereignty, and that assertion of sovereignty is in the eyes of the U.S. and Israel and many others in the world, is in the form of the Lebanese government being the only group in the country, the armed forces, that can have armaments, heavy weapons, light weapons, whatever. And therefore, the pressure has come from Israel and the U.S. to start by pushing the Lebanese to disarm the Palestinian camps in Lebanon. And that is seen as a test for then trying to disarm Hezbollah, which is the big prize for Israel and the U.S. They haven't made much progress on this. This is an old story. It's been going on for decades and decades. There's 12 camps in Lebanon, Palestinian refugee camps that are registered with UNRWA. There's hundreds of smaller settlements. The total number of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon is just over 200,000. That's a pretty accurate figure from several impartial recent studies. And these 200,000 or so Palestinians many are in the camps and others are not. And the sense is that they're on their back feet now. They're kind of weak, and this is the moment when they can be pressured to give up their arms. Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the so-called president of Palestine. I say so-called because about 85% of Palestinians surveyed in Palestine say they want somebody else to be president. But he was in Lebanon, stayed on official visit. He saw an opportunity to strengthen his credentials and get a little bit more credibility. He also saw an opportunity to, if there's progress on disarming the Palestinian camps in Lebanon, this will strengthen his credibility with Israel and the U.S. and others to then play a bigger role in the day after in Gaza. And if a new government system is formed in Palestine after the Gaza situation clears up one day, he wants to make sure that Fatah and his people get a cut of that and a share of the action. So there's various reasons why Abu Mazen was prompted to do this. He reached an agreement with President Aoun in May of this year, by which the Lebanese government would move to collect all of the arms in the Palestinian camps, and in return for which the Lebanese government would give the refugees more rights, property rights, work rights, housing rights, social security rights, healthcare, things like that. They don't have. They'd get more rights, but not citizenship, because that would upset the demographic balance in Lebanon. But they certainly want more rights, and Abu Mazen thought he'd try this. This has been tried, 500 times in the last 40, 50 years with no real success, because the Lebanese government simply is not interested in strengthening the well-being of the Palestinian refugees. It wants them to go somewhere else. And one of the excuses they use is that, well, if Lebanon gives the Palestinians better living conditions and more rights without citizenship, that will take away the impetus to work for the right of return, to go back to Palestine, which of course is just not very serious. But these kinds of things happen in these situations. So the agreement was made in May, and then they decided 2 weeks ago, the Lebanese government, to really make a push, and they came up with a plan with a few Palestinian factions, mainly Fatah in one of the big camps, Burj al-Barajni in Beirut, that there would be an initial handover of arms. They wanted a media stunt. They wanted something to show the world. Abu Mazen wanted it. The Lebanese government wanted it. And the Palestinians were not totally against it, but they say we can't give up our guns because we need to protect ourselves. And the Palestinians are reluctant to do this without guarantees of security and more rights and a decent life, because they've been fooled several times in the past. Arafat gave up the heavy armaments that the Palestinians, Fatah especially, had, and I think it was 1991. There was an agreement, and then when the Palestinian PLO went to Tunis, and then the Sabra and Shatila massacres happened, there was problems in other camps that were attacked in North Lebanon, on the Bayou near Beirut. So there's been several cases where the Palestinians in the camps needed arms to protect themselves from some Lebanese attackers, some Israelis, and possibly others like the Syrians in the past. So there's many people who would like to attack and hurt Palestinians in the camps. But they reached this point. They came up with one small truckload, like a big pickup of mostly small arms, a couple of machine guns and things like that. It turned out that these were not part of the Fatah arsenal. I mean, the arsenal is not that big, but so there was a symbolic transfer of arms in Burj al-Barajni, and then the next day in the bus camp in the south of Beirut. And they're talking about doing it gradually now and to get more arms submitted. The problem for the Palestinian agreement to do this is that there isn't a real pan-Palestinian agreement. It's Abu Mazen who really speaks for about half of Fatah. There's even members of Fatah in Burj al-Barajni who didn't agree with this, and therefore the process was delayed a week or two because there wasn't unanimous Fatah agreement. So it went ahead, and now they want to try to do more of this. But there's others like Hamas, like Islamic Jihad. There's a bunch of small Palestinian Islamist groups who are also, they have Lebanese members. Many of them started in the camps in the north where they're influenced by Tripoli and Syria. And they have some, or there's a small number of those, but so the players that matter aren't really interested in doing this because they see it as a way to destroy the Palestinian question as a whole. Because some people I spoke to last week in Lebanon and who are involved in this said that some people in the camps feel that if the Israelis wipe out Gaza, which they're trying to do, and then annex much of the West Bank, then the armed elements in the camps in Lebanon will be the last source of Palestinian national armed resistance to Israel. Now, a bunch of Palestinians, fighters with some light and heavy arms in a few camps in Lebanon is not going to fight Israel. They can't take them on. But the symbolism is important. The Palestinian symbolism of resistance is paramount in the Palestinian national narrative. And the fact that they don't just roll over and flee and give up, they fight if they have to, they die if they have to. This is human nature. It's nothing to do with being Palestinian. Jews did this. Ukrainians are doing it. There's people all over the world. If the Americans did it against the British, if you're attacked by a foreigner and subjugated and dehumanized, you're going to fight back. And so this is one form of doing this. So anyway, there's all these dimensions that are, and the Americans are pushing very hard for this, and Barak is trying to push the Lebanese to say, look, if you get the arms out of the camp, and then we can get the arms from Hezbollah south of the Litani River, just the south, then the Israelis will pull back from the 5 areas they occupy in South Lebanon, and they'll stop doing overflights and attacks. The response to that is, well, that's the reason that people are armed in Lebanon, whether it's the camps or Hezbollah, is because the Israelis were the aggressors before anything happened. So even from the 1960s, I remember being in Lebanon in the late 60s, early 70s, when the Israelis attacked, then it was the PLO and some Lebanese progressive radical groups, militant groups, secular ones, many of them communists and others. And so the problem isn't just that we have a war because there's armed Palestinians and Hezbollah. We have a war because the Israelis attacked Lebanon starting in the 60s and don't want it to be a country that can defend itself. So I'll stop there. There's many other dimensions to this, but it's fascinating to see how this question of the camps in Lebanon pulls in everything that's related to the region, going back to the French colonial creation of the country, the insistence of the Western powers not to allow the Lebanese army to be strong so it doesn't threaten Israel, the weakness of the defense system in Lebanon, which forced the birth of these militant movements, the continued Israeli attacks, the threats that came from Syria and other places, and now the interference of the U.S. They're trying to make Gaza a Riviera, and they're talking about a zone of economic prosperity in South Lebanon. So this nonsense that appeals to American television viewers who are pretty ignorant of these things, but doesn't make any sense for human beings who have experienced this process. And nowhere in this process are the principal actors, the Palestinians or the Lebanese, being fully consulted about the future of their country. This is coming from Israel and the U.S. So let me stop there and go on to the next one.
Yeah, and we should note, right, that this press to take arms away from Palestinians and Lebanese in the south of Lebanon or in the camps, what have you, is all happening at a time where Israel has been bombing more countries and more places than ever before, has been expressing, expansionist desires out loud in ways that it has never, and to degrees that it has never really done before, and is unrestrained in terms of its, willingness to use violence in ways like never before. I want
Just
to
one
thank
last
you for
point. Sorry,
that.
Yousef, if I can interrupt. One last point. The Israelis have already bombed a 5 kilometer wide zone all across the south of Lebanon. It's a no man's land now. It's completely bombed, and they've created this unilaterally through military action, and most of the world doesn't seem to care very much. And this is a
And
returning.
similarly in Syria, of course, where they have free range of action deeper and deeper into Syria than ever before. I want to shift now, though, to the international scene. And this month, we are going to see the United Nations General Assembly, supposed to take place here in New York and in the United States, as it does every year, although there have been some questions about whether or not perhaps the location should change because the United States has made some decisions to prevent Palestinians, PA leaders, from attending the UN General Assembly because there is going to be a spate of countries that are going to proclaim their recognition of a state of Palestine around this time as part of a coordinated international effort to advance recognition of a Palestinian state. There is a sort of a French-Saudi collaboration in this initiative. A lot of American allies who had not previously recognized Palestine have stated their intention to do so, including the French and many other Western countries as well, the Canadians, the Australians, and others throughout Europe. What do you guys make all this? I mean, obviously, we know that recognition of a Palestinian state by Paris or Sydney or whatever is not going to change the reality on the ground in Gaza, which is the most urgent thing right now. But it's definitely something that seems to be angering the United States. And in my view, at least it reflects something I think new, which is that Europe and other American allies have always traditionally followed Washington's lead when it comes to this issue, and have been hesitant to break with Washington when it comes to this issue, even if they've had differences with the way that Washington is handling things on the question of Israel and Palestine. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. It seems to be now that Europe is willing to chart more of its own course, even if it's not necessarily a super helpful course for the people of Gaza or elsewhere in Palestine. But it does kind of reflect a degree of European independence on this issue that we have not seen before. And I wonder what you all make of it, and if you agree with that as well.
This is such an interesting thing to watch because I remember, what was it, 10, 12, 15 years ago when the state of Palestine was recognized by the General Assembly. And I had, I was in grad school at the time, and people were saying, oh, congratulations, this finally happened. And like, as though some tangible outcome was going to fundamentally change, life in the West Bank, life in Gaza, my ability to even travel there. And so I see this in a similarly confusing light, although at this stage, I am baffled that this is the best intervention into what is increasingly recognized as a genocide. And they're not even doing it immediately. They're announcing plans to do it in the future, or in some of the country's cases, excuse me, contingent on the Palestinians taking certain actions. So it's a strange situation where they're, talking about this inalienable right for self-determination, but only because these terrible things have happened to you and only because Israel has done this. So it's almost being framed more as a punishment to Israel rather than as some benefit to the Palestinians, because a lot of these countries still selling weapons to Israel, still doing nothing but condemning attacks like the Nasser Hospital attack. I mean, if you were looking for a textbook case where you could really obviously say Israel is violating at least multiple, human rights law, international law, etc. We're not even getting that. So now, a couple of weeks ago, Yousef, you moderated this event where Diana Buttu gave what I thought was a compelling argument that while this doesn't feel like it changes the situation on the ground, it does open the door for different types of legal mechanisms that can be then used, because now we're talking about two states rather than, this limbo of an occupied territory. And, I won't get into that, and I encourage people to go back and listen to that. But it just seems like such a mealy-mouthed response at this stage, especially, famine. Israel's still not opening the borders. They're bombing hospitals in the middle of the day. They are coming out with all of these plans that essentially show a Gaza with no Palestinians, not to mention all the escalations in the West Bank, the annexation plan, the escalating violence, the all of this. What is statehood going to do for that? And then the last thing I'll say is, what is this Palestinian state? This is this fundamental question. Where is it? What are its borders? Who governs it? Is Jerusalem, what's the role of Jerusalem in this? What about the right of refugees? These fundamental questions that these powers have been content to ignore since Oslo and before. These are the questions that that we need to know before we can celebrate this quote unquote Palestinian state. And, I do think it says something that the U.S. is seemingly so terrified of this happening that it is punishing Palestinians and its allies for going forward with this. But it's hard to feel really like this is a sense of progress that it took the deaths of tens of thousands, if not more than 100,000, to get us to the point where they're willing to consider it. And B, it's just unclear what they plan to do with this. So if they're going to take this and really use it to advocate for Palestinians, to answer some of these unanswered questions, to instill some kind of, punitive action, accountability for Israel, okay, are they going to do that? I mean, they haven't made much indication of that, unless Rami and Hanna, you have some other insights that I haven't heard.
And we should say also that all of these states are parties to the Convention to Prevent Genocide. There's plenty of actions that they could take on that front. They're choosing not to do that and to do this instead. And that obviously speaks, I think, volumes about what this is mostly about. Hanna, Rami, did you want to chime in here at all?
Yeah, just took a couple of quick points. I think Yara touched on the key ones. I see the drivers of these kind of moves as two, essentially. One is the fear of some governments and many officials that they may be held illegally culpable and liable for the genocide, for being complicit at one point, because there's more and more legal action being taken all over the world. But the other one that's more dynamic, I think, is that the trends in public opinion around the world are changing steadily and significantly. They keep, every week we get a poll. There was just one 2 days ago by University of Maryland, should we tell him his people, about a plurality of Americans supports Palestinian rights more than it supports Israeli rights. It's just 1 percentage point, but it's symbolic. Something like 29% of Americans say they're more sympathetic to the Palestinians, 28% say the Israelis. This is unprecedented, unheard of. And it's just a dramatic symbol of the bigger trend all over the region, all over the world, North America and Europe, the Western world especially. But this scares politicians. If this sentiment translates into voting, and the primary for the mayor of New York is a early signal that scares the daylights out of politicians in the Western world, that majorities of people in Western countries may well vote for a candidate who's critical of Israel, supportive of Palestine, etc. So they're worried about their own incumbency and their own political liability. And the last point I'd make is I'm now totally convinced, with no doubt whatsoever, that what we're seeing is the true face of Western colonial and imperial sentiments. That the whole spiel since the 1940s about human rights and anti-genocide and refugee rights and all of these things is not serious. Was never serious. It was only applied to white people in the North and didn't apply to many people in the South. And even when people in the South were granted independence, many of them turned into economic basket cases because the West controlled the military and economic levers of power. So we're seeing that this colonial sentiment is still there, and the Palestinians are the last colonized people. There are technically others who are, but they're because they keep fighting, they've become the litmus test of the global struggle for justice against colonialism and imperialism. And they don't give up, and they keep fighting. And this has galvanized sentiments all over the world. You've got the flotilla going in now. So this scares Western politicians, and this is how they respond. But it's not a serious response, and unless they do one thing. Yara mentioned some, but I think the critical element: will they link recognition of a Palestinian state on paper with action through the UN to send in protection forces, for instance, or break the siege in Gaza, force the movement of food and stuff from Egypt? And they can do it if they want, especially if the U.S. goes along with it. But even if the U.S. doesn't, the other countries probably could. If there is some linkage to practical action, that would then become more significant, and it would open the way to, change in Israel and other things that might happen.
Yeah, we'll see exactly how much guts these Western states who are planning to recognize Palestine actually have when push comes to shove. But we have seen that Washington is not happy about this, and they're taking it out first and foremost on Palestinians. Surprise, surprise. We've seen that the United States has halted visas for Palestinians coming to the United States for urgent medical care, visas that had previously been approved for this kind of treatment. We've also seen PA officials, statement from the State Department that they're going to, ban them basically from coming ahead of the UNGA, prevent any visa approvals there, and also for Palestinians more broadly moving forward, denying sort of visa approvals. This has led to some conversation about whether or not, it puts the United States in violation of its commitments as a host of the United Nations, and whether or not the UNGA should even move from New York this year to elsewhere, like Geneva, so that everyone can attend without being denied by Washington. Hanna, what do you make of these moves? What are they really about? Is it going to in any way intimidate the parties that are moving towards recognition here?
Well, I think first and foremost, the motivation here has to do with domestic audiences and an international outcry. It has to do with culpability. It has to do with past complicity. Israel gave its answer. They submitted their official response to all of this, as did the United States. And we know what it is. We see it in Gaza City right now. The fact that they're pressing forward with this tells us what we need to know. But at the same time, I don't dismiss how certain legal procedures are significant, and they have had impacts. Even the talk of potential legal procedures has had impacts before. So when the initial statehood bid happened, I believe in 2012, the idea here was that the PLO delegation could then, sort of apply findings from the Goldstone report that had been compiled based on Israel's attacks in Operation Cast Lead between 2008 and 2009. So there are things there that matter. And I also just, I want to point out quickly that I think sometimes it's lost in the conversation, especially in the United States, how difficult, exhausting, humiliating, and expensive statelessness is for Palestinians. I think a lot of aspects of the daily struggle and the daily issues that brings about for Palestinians, forget about being a colonized subject. I think Americans are actually starting to get that quite a bit. What that looks like, what it looks like to be able to be snatched up from your home, to have your home destroyed at any time, to be arrested at any time if you're in the West Bank. But what it means to be stateless in the modern world and try to make something of yourself, to live a life, to protect your children, to provide for them. I don't think that's well appreciated and well understood. But so much of that, and any sort of gesture that brings Palestinians even a little bit closer to that, is utterly meaningless when a genocide is unfolding in Gaza. And meanwhile, on the same day that even the United Arab Emirates, which just normalized with Israel in recent years and has been, honestly, more and more of an ally to Israel in recent years, is now saying that Israel should not press forward with attacks on the West Bank. On the same day, they're announcing plans for annexation and, inching towards the ethnic cleansing that people like Bezalel Smotrich have been itching for a very long time, looking to mass expel the West Bank, just like they're aiming to do this in Gaza. And so all of this is happening at the same time where Israel's actions are bringing it at odds with its own allies and bringing it at odds with an international community that once welcomed it with open arms, and are pressing forward with what they're doing. And so what needs to happen now goes far beyond symbolism. It goes towards concrete actions. But the issue, and I think the bind that so many of these states find themselves in, is that if they are to impose an arms embargo, if they are to even volunteer forces for some sort of peacekeeping effort, it highlights the fact that they were complicit and had enabled a genocide in these months prior. And so I think this is the difficult position that we find ourselves in right now.
Thanks for that, Hanna. Yara, I want to give you the last word just to talk a little bit about the specific classification of visas that are being denied to Palestinians who are coming to the United States for special medical care. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like, what those programs look like, and what it means that the United States is shutting the door to who are often children who have been, had their lives irreversibly changed in many ways by American weapons?
Absolutely. It is so enraging to think, and I'm just going to focus on the medical permits here. The other permits, I think the tourist permits, they said only 9,000 Palestinians had applied for such permits last year. So not even that is a big population. When we talk about these medical evacuations, people have been evacuated from Gaza for medical care for decades. They have been, doing this, and they have had to go through this very, very bureaucratic, structured process, ultimately requiring approvals from Israel to receive care in the West Bank or in Jerusalem or in Egypt or elsewhere. So this is just kind of a continuation of a program that had been going on. Now, to be fair, very, very few of these cases ever came to the United States. So the World Health Organization that has tracked the evacuations, and I think they say something like 14,000 are needed, but less than several thousand, I think just over 2,000 have actually been carried out. The World Health Organization's online dashboard says that 28 cases have been evacuated to the U.S., while Heal Palestine, which is the NGO that has come under scrutiny here, has brought 63 children. So there's no estimate that more than 100 Palestinians total since October 7th have come to the United States for medical care. And these are among the most sympathetic cases you could possibly think of. These are children with cancer, and in most cases, children who have multiple amputations due to Israeli bombs provided by, created by, etc., the United States. To think that these children will be denied care in the United States, and these are not tourist visas. These are just medical visas, and then they go back. These are not visas that are meant for these people to stay, by online, far-right, anti-Islamic, basically I don't even know what to call them. Social media people, influencers. What are these people? I don't know. Like Laura Loomer, who apparently has a direct line to the Secretary of State of the United States, who simply said, didn't bring up a specific case, did not say, oh, there's nothing that actually happened, just saw images of Gazan children arriving at hospitals in the US and said, I don't like that. And that is what's driving US policy. And when Marco Rubio was asked about this, his response, pro-life Marco Rubio, was, yes, these are kids, but adults are coming with them, AKA their parents. So anti-Palestinian racism is so woven into this country that the thought that a parent who essentially won a form of lottery to get their child evacuated from Gaza to get prosthetics in Houston or wherever is going to use that as some cover to, I can't even finish the thought. It's so ludicrous and it's so rampant with racism. And this is what we get for collectively entertaining this fiction that Palestinian equals Hamas equals terrorist equals bad, scary. This is the post 9/11 Islamophobia all over again, focused this time on Palestinians, specifically Palestinian children. There is absolutely no, like I said, no event precipitated this, not that any singular event should cause such a change in policy. And the way that they talk about it, you'd think that there's tens of thousands of Palestinian children being brought here. In reality, most are going to Egypt or the UAE or Jordan. No Western country has taken more than 100 medical evacuees. And I think Italy is at the top of the Western countries list. So this is a despicable solution to a problem that does not exist, that is only meant to further create an enemy of the, to show that the Palestinians are our enemy, even their children, and we're going to punish them in every form that we legally can. And I find it personally really gross.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect place to end our conversation for today, and I couldn't agree with you more about that last point. Thank you all for joining us again for another Hiwar episode, and we'll certainly tackle these and many more topics on another day.